Hello everybody, it's now 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. But before we do, I'd like to cover just a few housekeeping items. As a reminder, this is ICI's webinar on knowledge management, a foundation for return on investment. The webinar will run for approximately 40 to 45 minutes, after which we will be having a question and answer session. We won't be answering questions during the webinar, but you can ask a question anytime using the GoToWebinar dashboard, and then I will aggregate all those and we'll ask them to our moderator, Dr. Mike Malone. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him now. Mike?
Hey folks, thanks for joining us today. The focus is knowledge management, a foundation for ROI. And I'd like you to keep in mind as we go through this that the emphasis on this presentation is the foundation for ROI. And it's really, this entire presentation is focused on demonstrating the value to the organization of market intelligence by empowering people in how to use it as effectively as possible. Now, knowledge management has a pretty straightforward definition, which recent research we did suggests is not well established in the industry right now, but it comprises strategies and practices that are used in an organization to basically identify, create, represent, distribute, and enable adoption of insights and experiences. And notice the key word there is it's all focused towards adoption of insights and experiences. That's the anchor reference point there. If you do anything that cannot ultimately be anchored back to adoption of insights and experiences, well, that's where you lose the connection and that's where you lose the value. To put it succinctly, the ultimate goal of any knowledge management system is to get the right information to the right individual at the right time, which is a very different mindset than the traditional market research platform that is focused on a single study or a category of studies and delivered to a specific audience. This has an enterprise view with the idea that ultimately market intelligence is most effective, most cost effective when you could get into the hands of anybody who could benefit from it when they have a need. Now, as part of our ongoing product development activities, we completed a survey of about 118 mid-sized to large enterprise companies, somewhat biased towards the large enterprise, that's 1,000+ employees. And we found out that knowledge management is not a well-established strategy within our industry. Less than 8% of the companies had a knowledge management system in place, and just given the interviews, I wonder about that 8% if they truly have a comprehensive knowledge management program in place or the beginning of it. When we probed them very specifically to tell us how did they interpret what knowledge management meant, we found out that about 2/3 of the individuals really struggled to come up with a definition, and rarely did they have awareness of the fact that it ultimately all boils down to enabling adoptions of insight and experience. They're talking more about the mechanics of managing information than ultimately what it's all about, which is getting that information to the right users. And one of the most damning things about our industry is data that was recently corroborated by a Harvard Business Review article that said about 11% of consumer-related decisions actually benefit from accessing relevant information. That's 89% of the time, 89% of the decisions that are being made within these corporations, and that was dead on with our findings as well. The individuals can't benefit from the very expensive research that the company has commissioned. That is a significant challenge. And folks, I believe this is really the fulcrum of the rationale for the significant reductions in a lot of market intelligence budgets that we've seen in the last couple of years. The capacity to demonstrate value is not defined by how well you do the study alone. It's defined by doing the study well and making sure you get the results to everybody who could benefit from that. Now, the cost of poor knowledge management is extensive, and it is getting even, and the problems are even greater right now. We have our famous 5 blind men and an elephant, where they're focused on just a part of the overall animal, and by virtue of that, they guess completely wrong what they are dealing with, much like the task of market research. When you don't have knowledge management in place, you have a proliferation of ad hoc siloed studies that provide a different view of the market. And in almost all cases, they provide a very narrow view of the market focused on a specific issue rather than looking at that issue in a context of the broader market conditions, which ultimately play a great role in determining how whatever you're studying is going to behave going forward. Because these studies are done individually, critical market information is lost outside of the silo, if not lost altogether. Currently, there is a growing use of these do-it-yourself survey tools. One major IT company we know of currently has 50 simultaneous users designing questionnaires using one of those survey tools, doing their own study. The stories that not only do you have a bunch of folks that are designing questionnaires that are in most instances not really reflecting best practices, but more importantly, that they spend the money to do this, and then once that information is done, and over half the time the results are locked in that individual's hard drive, and if they leave or go to different, it's lost to the organization. And this proliferation of different views basically creates this fog that when you're really trying to determine what is going on in the market, you've got all this fog that you have to cut through. Because you have that fog, it's difficult to achieve consensus. And if you can't achieve consensus in the interpretation of results, and that's not just within the team commissioning study, it is the wider audience of the people responsible for whatever is being studied. If you can't achieve consensus, you can't get action. You cannot develop the actionable strategies that ultimately, again, define ROI, because if you can't translate insight into action, the value of the research is compromised. One of the other elements is that when you have poor knowledge management, it's really tough to access historical studies. And if you can't access historical studies, that means that the entire value to the organization is limited to that one time when the presentation was made. It's lost. Well, if you look at this from a hard dollars and cents ROI perspective, that's wasting value. And if our challenge as an industry is to demonstrate value, that's something that we have to address. And then probably one of the least understood things about knowledge management, and I think about the field of market intelligence, is that ultimately what really determines our success and the success of our clients is the degree to which we can educate and empower the organization by building its knowledge base. Employees, the market's a moving target. Good market research makes sure that employees are completely informed about what is going on. Teaching these individuals how to look at the market and then providing a comprehensive view back to them is critical to empowering the most valuable asset in your organization, and those are the minds of decision makers. Constantly educating and make sure that every month you could look at your organization and say, we're a little smarter, we're a little more aware than we were a month ago. That's the goal of knowledge management. If you don't have a knowledge management process, it's real hard to pull that off. Now, as I mentioned, and folks, I'm going to beat this to death, but the enemy is the silo. And it's not that every research project that needs to be a corporate-wide endeavor. What it means is that as you are amassing information, it's important that you identify all the audiences that could benefit from it. You're still going to have your primary team design whatever project to meet their immediate needs, but making that insight available to everybody else, that's the key. Now, it's not just in the distribution of information you have problems. One of the things that happens is if you're a company who relies on the services of a full-service vendor, boy, you're paying about a third of the professional services fee to reinvent the wheel. You're reinventing questions, analysis strategy, and reporting strategies that ideally would be, should reflect a best practices approach. Now, there are some people that push back and say, I don't believe in best practices. Well, that's malarkey, because we teach it in our universities. There are best practices, and best practices are not defined by some academician blessing something. They've been shown to work. They've been shown to produce tangible value. And if you apply that tough criterion to looking at the various results of research that you've done in the past, you find, boy, we were able to really get benefit from this. You constantly want to recycle that. When you don't have the knowledge management system in place, you're basically reinventing a lot of times, and each different vendor you work with will approach it slightly differently. And by virtue of that, you're spinning again and again, and oftentimes to come up with mediocre or substandard solution. It produces inconsistency in question and questionnaire design, which really compromises your ability to look across study. And again, you're paying for variation that does not deliver value. There are best ways to ask a question, and quite frankly, folks, you don't need more than one way to categorize firms into an industry or spin levels. There are very easy best practices available for that. When you are commissioning research, it's important that you know what is the entire audience of folk who are going to be potentially able to use this insight. Again, folks, that's the value of the market research. That's where the ROI comes in. And currently, because most market research is siloed, there's no concern about these other audiences. Well, sometimes we found that if you understand the wider audiences, the perspective you take in to design that questionnaire can be slightly different and in a direction that will give you more benefit. It also helps address the fact that a lot of market research is real tactical in nature. You're looking at a specific one moment in time phenomena, which, folks, that's a fleeting image. You know, that's trying to assume that everybody behaves the same way every day, which is not true. And more importantly, that tactical insight is very tough for people to roll up into a broader understanding of the market. Knowledge management provides a platform that every piece of information, whether it be tactical or strategic, fits into a broader paradigm that is designed to help people access and understand it. And with that, you overcome the biggest problem that we've encountered with our clients out there, and they don't have a holistic view. One of our clients has 5 divisions, and every year we deal with all 5 divisions, and it is absolutely amazing. Each one of those divisions has a very self-serving but completely different view of the market. And the lack of synergy and consistency in that view produces a lot of inefficiency in strategy development, and more importantly, the strategies used by the different divisions within a corporation or different groups or whatever, you don't have that synergy. They don't complement each other. Sometimes they actually work opposite each other. Now, the key elements of a corporate knowledge management system, the foundation of it is you need to have a comprehensive taxonomy. Boil it down, folks. That just says, let's agree to speak this language. And we're all going to speak this language going forward, which uses specific words to describe things in a consistent fashion. That really is a critical foundation element in a knowledge management system. It's not that hard to build. On our engagements, we often prime the pump. We have something to start with, and then you tweak it. And by the way, one of the other things to keep in mind about a knowledge management system, it's an evolving entity. You're constantly tweaking it. Second thing is that you need to agree on market metrics and your key performance indicators, and you need to have them identified in terms of this is how we define them, and here's the audience for them. But the comprehensive taxonomy needs to be linked to those metrics so that you could always look at, if I'm looking at like a pipeline metric or a satisfaction metric or a productivity metric or whatever, you could instantly see here are all the elements that we use to define that metric. Along with that, you have to have a comprehensive inventory and documentation of data resources. Now, here's another problem that we keep running into. There are 3 data streams that need to be integrated to provide a comprehensive view of the market. You have your primary research, both qual and quant, that provide 1/3, but you also now have this phenomenal flow of data from digital platforms, web analytic platforms that provide continuous daily insight regarding market that needs to be integrated into that view, as well as a variety of enterprise systems like your CRM system, your ERP systems that also produce continuous data streams. You need to inventory all of those elements in a context of the taxonomy to find out what do we have to work with here. Right now, our estimate is that less than 60% of all the information relevant to a question is ever connected to the business question at hand. And so people go by with a limited view, even though the data is available. You also, with these knowledge management systems, have to be able to deal with rich media, which means that system needs to be able to accommodate qualitative data as well as quantitative data and the variety of sources. And you could do it now, especially with storage being so cheap, computing power, all of these elements. There's no reason to exclude them. It should be as easy for an individual to find relevant qualitative vignettes that are related to the theme of interest as it is for them to pull up data. And it's very doable. It's just a matter of defining it in the platform. And then with this, you basically have a best practices report template that's always customized to your company. Best practice is not defined externally. Best practice is defined internally. And you basically as anytime you do research, you assess how well did this help you develop actionable strategy, and the best, most effective strategies are retained. And again, this is an evolving, you're constantly tweaking, but you always want to use those because they should be at the head of the list of the options for anybody considering a similar inquiry in the future. And then you need to have user-friendly access extraction and reporting dashboard. And folks, dashboard, portal, whatever, it's got to be something that somebody could go on their computer from any place and get that information with minimal effort. The rule of thumb we use is if someone cannot identify relevant insight within 10 minutes, they're going to stop looking. And that's a tough challenge, but it's doable. Now, I talked about the components. There are also process elements. You need to have best practices, definition, and standardization. You're beating that drum to death. And then you need to have a research vetting process that literally looks at the research that's being commissioned by your company. If somebody's going to do a study, it needs to go through this body who is going to look at it and ensure that it is consistent with the company's standards. Now, this is the real challenge to knowledge management because it's just in the nature of corporate world out there that folks want to do it their way. They want to go rogue. They don't want to follow the rules. Whoever did this before wasn't as smart as I am. Boy, you've got to club that, and I mean club the spit out of it, because that is an expensive bias. And you've got to make sure that your organization has discipline as it approaches this. Now, I know many of you are going, not going to happen. Well, that's probably one of the reasons why knowledge management is not further along. I admit that. But, folks, there is a tremendous cost to it. And it's not just the cost in potential lost benefit. It is the cost of, if you're up against a competitor who is leveraging their information more effectively, you're going to feel it because they'll be able to isolate your weaknesses and act upon them more effectively than you can. Another key element, component of knowledge management process is content tagging. Nothing is done that is not tagged. The tagging protocol comes out of your taxonomy and defining your metrics. But content tagging, it's a big task, but you've got to have it. Now, again, you guys are going, this guy's nuts. He's advocating all of these things that are expensive. We don't have the money to do it. But, folks, here's the proposition. The way we're doing market research right now doesn't do the job. It's great at collecting the data, but our real job is to deliver actionable insight. And if we fail there, doing the best study in the world is worthless. You've got to have some process for quantitative and qualitative data loading. Our clients basically rely on us at the beginning, and then they take it over typically within 6 months to a year. Then you've got to have a great end-user training and support protocol. Nobody should be allowed to use market research without first going through some kind of training protocol that prepares them to use it well and to use all the tools at the disposal. Knowledge management is an extremely powerful tool, but you've got to be prepared to train people so that not only do they know how to use the system, but they know how to interpret and apply the insights appropriately. And then lastly, one of the new protocols that can be supported with this is meta-analysis. Meta-analysis basically, you see a lot of it with the big data questions that are out there. It's looking across studies. Folks, some of the best insights available from market research come from meta-analysis across multiple studies. You have a knowledge management program using standardized taxonomy and all these elements. Not only is it easy, it starts to affect how you're doing things. Optional meta-analysis, we have one client that basically was able to dispense with their customer satisfaction research just by consistently plugging a few questions in everything they did. Now that became apparent from meta-analysis, but it produced huge savings. So these are the basic structure, skeleton of a knowledge management system. And it begins, you do end user market intelligence requirements, finding out for your decision makers, what information do you need? And you ask that in terms of what business questions do you need to answer. You don't ask them to tell you the variables. Just ask them to identify the questions. And then you ask them to tell how frequently do you need this information updated. From that, you go into the market intelligence taxonomy, you build that, you define all that. That actually is not that tough, folks. It takes about 6 weeks. And from that, then, you go and you pull in your web analytic data, your primary research, and then your internal data feeds, and you code those data sources up using your taxonomy. Then you plug all that in through the integrated data warehouse, and that supports 3 portals. The market intelligence analysis portal, that's where individuals can go on and find any related information, qualitative, quantitative, web analytic, or whatever, related to their business question. This is the end user portal. You have a KPI tracking portal, which is typically, we found, most important for senior executives. Now, they all have KPI tracking portals now, so you typically blend into that. But what you're really doing there is you've got to make the linkage between all the individual data elements and the variety of market intelligence assets that you've got and how they link back to the KPI. So that if any senior exec sees a problem in terms of the KPI tracking, that they could quickly decompose where is that coming from or kick it over to someone else. But since they're always connected, you'll know this KPI signal that we just picked up is predicated on this knowledge that we could access from these locations, and you make sure very efficiently that you can, typically as it goes, you have a senior exec see something and go, what in the world's happening with our pipeline? I need to know, and they slam on, all that stuff, whatever. With these systems, folks, and we've seen this actually demonstrated, you could have the answers because the path is predefined, you're not ad hoc, you've got this element, you could pull together relevant data and deliver it to that individual literally within a few hours. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the Market Intelligence Manager portal where you control access, you're monitoring utilization. You actually have an internal customer satisfaction process that's going on with this that's picked up there, but this is the system. It is pretty straightforward. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the foundation is content tag. If you don't tag it, you can't access it. If you can't access it, you can't extract it. And it's real simple. You've got to be prepared to change. Very few market intelligence organizations have a content tagging protocol defined, nor staff that are devoted to this. And folks, you're not going to get around devoting staff to it. And I know you're saying, you're crazy, you're not going to get the people. But folks, your company can't get the value out of market intelligence if it doesn't have this access that is provided by tagging. And there are 3 typical categories of tagging. You've basically got your corporate taxonomy standardized tags that range from consumer segment definitions, product service references, competitive landscape, and documentation in context, merger, acquisition. These are standard elements, folks, that they're unique and need to be customized to each client, but the categories of these standardized tags are consistent across all companies, really straightforward. You're always going to have to come up with some ad hoc customized content tag. Market research projects, the majority of them will always have some unique element within them, some unique dimension. You've got to accommodate that. They're not always going to be followed your standard protocol. But we have found that these ad hoc unique elements tend to recur over time. And you want to make sure that you come up with a tagging protocol that will make sure that when the ad hoc thing came up in 2012, it will be addressed in the same fashion in 2013 or 2014. And then the last category of context tags that we are content tags that we refer to are called context tags, and they give you some insight as to what the variable is looking at. Effective orientation. Does this provide some insights regarding like, dislike, satisfied, dissatisfied, anything in that attitudinal place? You could come up with content tags, and remember, folks, any piece of data could have as many tags as you want to assign to it. The more, the better. You always have context tags that are looking at, is this in reference to a specific competitor, to our company, or that. And then context tags also tell you, where does this data come from, its source. And That's important because there'll always be somebody that will challenge some research and say, where'd you get that? You need to be answered. Now, content tagging is a highly structured process. This is not ad hoc. You have to identify dedicated staff devoted to it. They need to go through extensive training that's provided by vendors like us. And then continuous calibration across your staff responsible for tagging to make sure they tag in a consistent fashion. And again, folks, that's like inter-rater reliability, things like that. It's not rocket science. It's dutiful application of known practices with an end towards delivering the value that ultimately resides within a market intelligence initiative. Now, content tagging, if you just go out there willy-nilly and say, here's a gazillion tags and we're going to apply them, it creates a data stream that literally becomes a fire hose that people they just can't handle it. They need to have a theoretical foundation, a paradigm, something that breaks all this data down into a heuristic or a easy to understand model that will help guide them. And it can't be too big a leap because if it takes them 2 weeks to understand the model, they won't put in the effort. It has to be intuitive. Now here's our baseline model that we use. It's very simple. We call this an opportunity life cycle. It applies, we can apply it to business, consumer, you name it. But we basically say there are 5 basic arenas you need to understand if you're going to do good market intelligence. You understand need, search, select, acquire, and experience. Now, this is the ICI model because this lends itself very well to strategy, but it doesn't have to be our model. It could be any model as long as you have a model. If your client has a way of looking, or if your company has a way of looking at the market, then that's what you use. But you need to create this 30,000-foot access point, which is a model that is intuitive and easy to understand and well-defined. And then once you've defined that model, and again, you rely on your vendor, you would come up, it doesn't matter as long as you have one and you use it consistently. Then you go through, and here, like we in our 5 stages, one of the stages was search. We've gone through and we said, if you're going to understand search, here are the metrics that our company says you need to consider. In qualitative research, we're looking for these elements. From survey research, we want to understand this. From social media, we understand this. From web analytics, we want this. CRM. Notice how we have an integrated statement of the data related to the thing we're trying to study. That's perspective. Now, an individual is whenever you use a knowledge management system, with a knowledge management system, before they go out there and start designing a survey or commissioning a study, first thing they're going to do is they're going to look at what do we have. If you could imagine, they go to the model, they click on search, this comes up, it's color-coded, and it shows the availability of data against each of these points here. And again, these points, that's customized to your organization. It reflects your values and your priorities, but it's stated. They go and they can see what they've got, and then from that they go, oh, this is out of date, or we want to drill down on this or whatever, and see you've got the linkage built. Anything you do above and beyond this set is linked back to it. That linkage gives you key value. One of the biggest potential values out there is an alternative tracking research. Tracking research it's a tough beast. You have sampling issues, you've got data volatility, you've got smoothing, and if we were ever honest completely about tracking research and its true utility to the organization, you go, gosh, it's really expensive, and you know, after the first couple times, people don't pay a lot of attention to it. Well, that's an expensive proposition there. If you have an integrated data perspective from your knowledge management system, one of the things you can do to supplement tracking studies, which you may do quarterly or whatever, and literally get daily progress reports, is you rely on primary research to establish baseline values, periodic recalibration, but then you use like social media, web analytics, CRM data, which by the way, free, you own these data sites, and you have them calibrated back to these other issues to provide continuous feedback. And all of this related back to the paradigm that organizes all of your knowledge management insight. With this, folks, you can make it as long or as short. This is customized to your list, but most importantly, it is defined and people know exactly what your company's policy is regarding how we conduct market research and what we consider to be the minimum level of being informed required of our decision makers. Now, ultimately, if you want to demonstrate ROI, and this is, it looks a little tedious, folks, but this is where the greatest value of market intelligence lies. Now, in my experience, one of the toughest challenges is that we'll do this phenomenal research, and it was so well executed, and brilliant insights and all this other stuff. And then we toss it over the fence to the market manager, and the market manager is going, well, what do I do with this? Okay, I've got this insight. But it doesn't really provide tactical guidance about how do I implement this insight. Well, one of the things with a knowledge management system that you could do is you could also inventory all the touch points that provide an opportunity for your client to interact with prospective customers. It's really straightforward. Using their same paradigm here, search, select, acquire. These are the touch points, and this is it for this one company. These are all the touch points that it has to basically compete against. And at each one of those touch points, there is some number of strategies currently deployed by the company. Folks, this is where you make it or break it in terms of marketing. A finite number of touch points, you have X number of strategies deployed against it, and the effectiveness of those strategies determines success or failure, period. Now, if you want to get in and do good diagnostics to help demonstrate the ROI of research, you need to be able to provide this level of granular insight. With a knowledge management system over time, you could build this, support it, you can literally maintain it. And this is one of the most powerful, though it's not the prettiest example that we've got here. This is a powerful chart, folks, because it gives you a high-level view immediately that says, where are we sputtering? What are we doing well? What requires attention? And specifically, what strategies aren't working for us, because those are the ones that we need to address, as well as where do those strategies manifest themselves? Folks, having worked with executives, if you could deliver this kind of insight back to them, you will see them go, okay, now I have something that when I get this insight, I know exactly where to apply it. And what things I'm spending money for, I should have influenced by what I just learned. Now, here's an example of a business-to-business. This was a technology company content tagging system that we come up with. It was totally customized. Notice they have different words that they broke everything down for. Demand, context, consideration, solution. Folks, you can make this any way you want. But what they did is that they said, if you work for us, you want to understand demand, and you're going into a presentation, you better be prepared to tell us what are the business objectives and IT objectives that lead to demand, what's the catalyst, who are the initial. See, they define all the pieces of information that they require decision makers to understand before they make a decision. It's almost like imposing a standard of saying, if you're going to be spending our companies or making investment on behalf of our company, marketing, strategy, product development, you must be informed, and this is the standard. And notice, folks, that there's a flow here. Demand, context, it's very straightforward. And if you have a knowledge management system, you could be measuring some of these with primary research, some of these with web analytic data, or using both in conjunction. But this is a very straightforward map. And actually, this map, as we presented here, this was the image that if you go and logged into this company's knowledge management system, this is what you saw. And you click on any one of these elements, and then it would basically direct you to all the relevant research available. So this is just an example of what it looks like for a business-to-business tech company. Now, enhanced productivity via best practices. Folks, best practices and the real manifestation of them is best practices means that you have templates. And you have best practices templates for questionnaires, questions, analysis strategy, and also for reporting. The key to the templates is not only consistency for all reasons that I've been talking about, but they also make sure that your organization, whenever it does market intelligence, it's going to be done as well as you know how. And you don't need to worry about it. And you'll be able to connect all the dots because every element has been basically integrated back into your knowledge management system. It ensures that each study is done properly and realizes the full potential of meta-analysis, which, folks, I believe meta-analysis can deliver at least 50% of the total value available with any kind of market research, specifically because meta-analysis across studies is a great way for looking for cycle dynamics. And ultimately, understanding cycle dynamics is key to effective marketing. It produces immediate savings because once you have a best practice template, say for instance that one of the strategic needs you have is to do buyer behavior research. Look, folks, you only need to define that questionnaire once. From that point forward, you don't need to retain a vendor to come and reinvent the wheel. You'll use the one that you have. As a matter of fact, if you use the one that you had, the programming of that questionnaire is the majority of it's done. Any translations are already done, producing very significant savings, and they save a lot of time as well. Use of the best practice report templates is extremely powerful. I cannot tell you the number of disappointing engagements. I've been in the business 30 plus years where you do a great study, but the client had different expectations from when you were designing the questionnaire from what you produced. And boy, that's, no matter how well you did the study, that's not a good thing. Well, best practice report templates make that impossible because the client literally begins the research process by first understanding what you need to do, and then they go through a library of these best practices deliverable, report templates, market simulator templates, spreadsheet templates, you name it, you've got them. They pick exactly what they're going to get. This is the what you see is what you get. And by virtue of doing that, not only do you absolutely ensure that their expectations will be met, but you also accelerate the timeline. And one of the things that, at least in some of the solutions we developed, is that once you have these best practices defined, you can develop expert systems that will automatically, you select the deliverable, the expert system will literally build 90% of the questionnaire you need to get that. The templates also can include guidance and logic, intelligence to ensure clients won't misrepresent the data. You can keep them from doing that so you don't have somebody stating some massive conclusion on because they didn't know a skip pattern was in place, or templates take care of that. They address all of these multitude of issues which are easy to skip over if you're doing a variety of ad hoc studies. If you're constantly refining the best practice over time, you nail them. You could build the logic in, and as well as that, you could also put in those parameters for statistical testing, sample size thresholds, and all of that. Best practices allow you to leverage insight and literally move you closer to being a informed and on top of it company, as opposed to dealing with this fire hose of all these independent studies. Now, knowledge management system design consideration, one of the first things is that a lot of folks go, oh gosh, what an ambitious endeavor, and trying to get this right out of the gate, whatever. We found over time, don't worry about it, because I guarantee you, no matter what you start with, you'll change. This is an evolving, moving system, and it really doesn't matter where you start as long as you have continuous refinement of your strategy built in the process. And this whole protocol constantly does that, so it doesn't matter where you start, you'll get it right, but keep in mind, you're going to do it over time, and you're going to continue to tweak and tweak, which means you're going to have dedicated staff. Folks, you can't get the value out of market intelligence if you don't have knowledge management staff. You just can't get it. And if you're going to spend money on market intelligence, this is a real cost that, though it was ignored, it compromises the value of your research, and you've got to address it. And then the biggest challenge, and folks, this is a real tough one. You've got to have a champion who's going to demand that folks play and that they're going to support this system and follow the rules. And I mean, you've got to have a strong manager, because if they don't, just the nature of corporate, the corporate world out there, you've got guys going rogue all the time. And irrespective of all these arguments, they'll say, oh, forget it, I want to do it this way, and I've got the money and I'm going to do it this way. You've got to beat that guy in the head, or the woman in the head with the club, and just say, that's crazy, and we're not going to waste our money anymore. One of the unfortunate truths in knowledge management, folks, if you cannot find an executive champion for this who's going to provide the power, unfortunately, don't waste your money. Don't even start. It'll fall apart, and you will spend a lot of money and all this getting it in place. And it's very sad. We've seen that happen a couple times. You've got to have a champion, and it's critical. Now, one of the most interesting things that we found out is if you put this in, typically we're brought in by the CMO or the guys involved in marketing. But once you put in a knowledge management system, which, by the way, is always tracking the value of research, because you know that touch point by strategy, it's monitoring the yield of every one of those cells. It is as specific as you get. Turns your CFO into your #1 fan. Once you get the CFO behind you, you're golden, and they'll guarantee you have the funding you need. Folks, that is a pretty quick overview of knowledge management. Hope I didn't go too fast.